So hello there, I'm David Bradley, aka Schizophreniforms, and here today in this video I'm doing a sort of follow-up video, more or less, of the podcast episode 7, and it's called, this video obviously you'll probably be able to see, it's called Schizophrenia and What I Perceive. So this is what I wrote in relation to that. So you might have asked yourself, perhaps while watching other videos, especially the recent podcast, Perspectives on Enlightenment, what are the experiences I've actually had, and how have they given me a mindset where I feel I'm in a position of authority on the subject? Or more succinctly, why do I feel that I have anything valid or useful to say that others don't? And this video kind of addresses both of those thoughts. And so before I get into the description of the actual experiences I want to frame them by saying the following. The one thing I know best is my own life, basically, and that's why I feel I can say these things from a position of authority, as perhaps just like you, yourself, I know myself better than anyone else. Now, no one knows my story more intimately and distinctly than myself, but that said, I may not have clarity and objective explanations for these events, and that's why I even bother to discuss it with other people at all. That's almost the point of me doing this for myself. That's what I'm getting out of it. And a part of my voyage of self-discovery and recovery as well is this whole process of open dialogue is a way for me to gain insight and clarity and objectivity through candid and open discussion of what I experience, so that I can identify the flaws and accuracies of my own experience and perceptions. And then one final note before describing the experiences that I have is this. These experiences, more or less, are going to be described from the perspective of belief, aka I will talk as though they are, and in the way I describe them, so that they're real, and in the way I describe them I'm not suggesting necessarily that they're real phenomena, but instead I'm explaining them as I experience them, rather than explaining what I think the phenomena truly are, and there's a distinction there. And further to say, okay, so bear in mind the entire way through as well that a large part of these experiences are why I'm considered to be mentally ill, and I'm abundantly aware of both that, and also that A, it might not be real, and that B, there are alternate explanations for these experiences, and C, that I'm most likely aware of these alternate explanations, to some extent at least, because I've spent the last 10 years, and indeed most of my life, searching for these alternate explanations, and I will briefly try and explain the alternate views within the description of the apparent phenomena anyway. So, here we go, these are my experiences. Now, there's a 25-point list of these, so I'm just going to pick the ones that stand out the most to me, that I find the most interesting to say. But they include things like chi manipulation, low-level telekinesis, telepathy, precognition, precognitive dreams, the power of the heart, body and soul and the mind, channeling, gods and goddesses, dialogue with spirits, perception of non-physical aspects of reality, perception of other realities, deity, light and dark energies, warrior arts, healing arts, in terms of chi manipulation, spirit travel, so that might be astral projection or dream travel, angels, demons and other demigods, samsara, the earthly realms and heaven and hell, nirvana, which might be prescribed as self-realization, the beginning and end of the spiritual path, God and Satan, Buddha and Mara, truth and illusion, the paradox of unity. If one is all, then God is equal, or at least part of or containing the devil as well, etc. Energy perception, hallucinatory sensory feedback of spiritual or psychical data, and then the last point being synchronicity and the perception of allegorical messages in waking reality as a way to communicate with deity, or at least the higher self as deity. So I've got a few things written down that I'm just going to go through, and then I'm going to come back and address maybe some of the other issues depending on how I feel and how the video flows. So the starting point is psychic experiences. And again, this is from the perspective of belief. It doesn't mean necessarily this is how I explain these phenomena, but this is how I experience the phenomena. So I'll read on. I believe it's possible to use psychic energy. You may be cynical already, but this is, again, the perspective of what I experience. And just a quick point before I go into it. This is my perception of the events as though it's happening, not necessarily, again, how I believe it. This is the way it appears to me when I experience it. And quite often I've gone and found these words that I'm using to describe it after the phenomena have arisen in my perception, after I've experienced it. So it's not that I've read a load of books and then gone, oh, well, I must be doing that, and then learned to done it. I've had these phenomena arise, and then I've done the research to try and find rational, or at least a terminological basis with which to describe them in most of the cases of these phenomena. So, with that in mind, I believe it's possible to use psychic energy to control both your own experience and perception of reality, as well as others' perceptions and experience of reality. For example, it is possible to use the main focus of your attention to influence where other people will look at a given moment. And with practice and focus, it's possible to reach out with your energy and tap and either attack or caress a person, or create a fake sound or project a word into their mind, although telepathy will be covered later. I believe that, for example, through a heightened state of awareness, through hallucinogens or stimulants or agitation, such as altered states of consciousness brought about by meditation or other mental practices, that is possible. And again, this is something I experienced and then found an explanation for and terminology for. It is possible to perceive visual, tactile and auditory data about the mental environment of a place or person overlaid into normal everyday waking reality. Further, that I believe that I experience that these data streams are not simply imagined, and although it's very possible to fool or trick the mind into these perceptions, it's also possible to interact with supposedly hallucinatory experiences and train their sensitivity and accuracy to the point where a hallucination or the imagination can be distinguished rapidly and accurately from a truly psychic experience. Just how I experience it. I further believe that with training and persistence that any human being, and possibly indeed even animals, plants and insects, can communicate through what I think of or term the thought field. Now, the thought field is a mental perceptual medium in which intentions and observations and thoughts themselves flow, and these mental phenomena are connected in a kind of psychical, emotional, perceptual or perceptional field or substrate, which can be accessed simply by allowing the mind to become passive whilst observing intently the things that arise in one's perception. Further, to add to this, I believe that the ego is a defensive tool used to protect, spiritually what you refer to as the ego, is partially a defensive tool to protect the psyche from being bombarded with a dangerous, otherwise unmanageable amount of perceptual data, so that one might focus on a task in everyday waking states. So, for example, if you're concentrating on something, that's where your mind is focused, and the self or the ego, or whatever capacity you term that, prevents you, it gives you a point of focus to a certain extent, or it can be used as a tool to give you a point of focus by allowing you to absorb your consciousness and your awareness into just one thing at a time, rather than being bombarded with all this subconscious data that's potentially available. And I've experientially had the sensation that much more of my subconscious field of information, that thought field I was just referring to earlier, I've had that much more present in my conscious awareness, and then had to learn to use my ego to focus my mind, and use the focus of my mind itself as a tool for focusing on one particular source of information at a time. And it reminds me, in retrospect, of something I watched recently called Legion, where she teaches the main character of it, who's a incredibly powerful psychic, she teaches him how to hear one thought at a time, and she says, imagine it's a volume knob. And that's very much, that it struck me watching that, because that's how I apply that as well. Like, you turn down the emotional reaction and the detail and the information at the phenomenological level. So if it's voices, I try not to focus on the voice of everything going on, like just being open and uncontrolled, and like I focus in on just one thing and try and have a mental volume knob to turn down all the other experiences. And for me, that's how I navigate reality. So it struck me that they would use that, and it seemed quite almost like, whether it's a literary tool that they've used to describe it, it was oddly accurate to my own perception of psychic phenomena. So along with the ability to focus and block data, the ego is also a kind of mental or psycho-spiritual recording device which is used to retain memory and context to a given situation, so as to retain the perception of everyday waking state as reality. In a similar fashion to which we forget dreams when we wake up, so forget reality as we become awakened, and thus to stay in a reality and thus affect it, we must believe in it for it to be real. So an example of a physical version of this, a neurological version of this, is the two neurotransmitters melatonin and serotonin. So serotonin adds vividness to the waking world, and melatonin adds vividness to the dreaming world. And that's possibly why when people take ecstasy, for example, they feel like this is true reality, or they've reached a new level of an actual reality, because it adds extreme vividness to this reality. And some people think it's like heaven, or like their instant reaction is like, this is a new place, I can't believe, or a new state of mind. And it can be quite profound, and that in its own way is similar to that kind of awakening that I'm describing, but it's just a neuropharmacological explanation for examples of the different waking states, which leads me in further. So that is not to say, however, that is there any difference between the rules of these realities. When we believe something is real, we are then able to perceive it. And my belief about everyday waking reality is that because we all agree to certain rules and perceptions, or accept them, these rules, this reality is stabilized and given ever greater substance. Which then leads me on to an interesting thing that, again, might be a bit debatable to you, but this is what I experienced directly, is that I believe there are many realities and perceptually distinct realms within just the normal waking world, not to mention a potentially infinite number of accessible realities within the dreaming world and the awakened world, which I would distinguish. So you have the dream state, where you can become lucid in a lucid dream. So you awaken that you know who you are in this world, in the dream world, and you have consciousness that it's a dream. And the same thing applies to this state, this world, where you awaken to the reality that this world has a dream quality to it, or is a dream, someone else's dream, for example. So I'll just read what I've written, but like further, that there might be another perceptually distinct realm, say post-mortem in the afterlife, or with an awakened state or enlightenment, where you transcend, but like you move to a point where after death you then carry through that next stage of evolution. Just an idea, but this is what I experience and postulate based on those experiences. So in the dreaming world, for example, there's an almost godlike quality that is easily recognized when you awaken from the dream, as the reality in which you just were, the dream state, is recognized being a world in which your thoughts become manifest. And when you're aware of this, you can in fact control and change your whole reality like a god might do, such as happens in a lucid dream. And you can also experience alternate realities that seem incredibly vivid in the lucid dreaming state, where you're not manifesting them, and it seems like you've accessed another world, another reality, another stream of existence. And that's a not commonly reported phenomena, but people who are very good at this or practice it a lot, and that's where you get this idea of astral travel or dream travel, where you literally enter another world, or can travel through time, or all these kind of bizarre perceptions that may or may not be accurate, but that's what it feels like at the time. And this is what I think of as a sort of underworld, the earth that holds the seed of consciousness that upon birth is brought into the shared reality of the waking world. Now, part of this is spurious information based on DMT, and when it's released after the womb for 45 days in the womb, and then when you're born, and then when you dream, and then when you die. There's something that makes me think with that perception that that's the substrate within which we all exist as like proto-consciousness or something like that, like the potential for what we become in this reality. And I'm not going to say any more than that, because I'm spurious about it, but that's what those things suggest to me, and I've had conversations with people that suggest that that's what they believe or perceive themselves as well. So I'll just keep reading for now. In the waking world, there's a mental restriction in that the beings you interact with seem to not realize that they're all part of one mind and thus not separate beings. And one could easily infer that upon lucid waking, so enlightenment, for example, the awakening to everyday reality as a kind of dream, but a mutual dream or someone else's dream that you're experiencing as a character in their dream, for example, one becomes what mystics call self-realized. And the mistaken restriction, I think, comes from not accepting that this reality is a dream. Thus we consider it to be real, or an ultimate reality, and in that we keep returning to it. This is what the Buddhists might refer to, I'm not sure if I've got this accurate, but as samsara, or Einstein's persistent illusion, which I will refer to as 3D reality or the waking world, and I believe is the growth point of experience of interaction with other beings in preparation for becoming what we refer to as deity in the next level of reality. So again, my experience and understanding based on those experiences is this: what happens when one becomes deity is a mystery to me, but as yet the pattern would suggest to me that the mind's understanding that one becomes deity in different stages: local, global, solar, galactic, and so far up to universal consciousness, which I believe one could infer multiversal consciousness and so forth. And that goes the other way as well. Like, our cells in our body might believe that we're God, for example. They might have a consciousness that exists within them that, if we actually analyse it objectively, might not be distinct from our own. It's just the perceptual tools they have. How the thing that is them, so like an individual cell might have electrical interactions, it might have biochemical and enzymic interactions and protein exchanges and stuff like that, and to them that might seem like this reality does to us, and we might have no conception of what that might feel like, but to them they might feel that they might be having discussions between themselves in their own bizarre way, or even internal perceptions, or they might even have thoughts. They might have something so distinct from that they can't even recognize it, but they might have self-awareness in that same way. It goes in both directions, is what I'm arguing. And with each stage of growth, one attains the ability to be aware of, and therefore influence or at least observe everything available at that level of deified progression, so omniscience. So, for example, the local consciousness will be able to retain and perceive everything that is arising in a specific area surrounding the core focal point, in this case the individual's conscious mind. Whereas at the global stage, for example, one would be present at every stage of the planet and understand the values and energy of the planet, and possibly be the planet, and so far forth up to universal and beyond. Now, with all this in mind, it makes things like telepathic phenomena not seem that ridiculous. If we're part of one, for example, one greater substrate, and we are, like people suggest, we're all God, when we haven't got that recognition of it, and that God, we're all one, we're all part of one universal substrate. There is this, or if there is, like my postulation of the thought field, like you can have these experiences of what seems like omniscience. And I think I want to stop there, but I will do a second video on this, I think, because I think that covers quite the core basics, and then each other topic that I haven't yet mentioned could probably be elaborated on in much more detail, and with greater relevance, and so basically, yeah, they're my experiences and how I interpret and rationalise or otherwise directly experience them. I welcome debate and alternate explanations, and even debate as to whether these experiences are actually real or not. You could think, yeah, everything you said is real, or you could think, you're bonkers. I want to discuss that. I want your input, because it's interesting to me, and I hope it was interesting to you. So yeah, see you on the next video. I'm David Bradley, aka Schizophreniforms, and see you soon.